So there I was, lying on my back in the Southern California sun, thinking about my relationship and the path that had led me there. My friends, I come from a long line of experts at failed relationships. Take my great-grandparents, for instance. In every picture ever seen of them, they always appeared exactly the same, standing about this far apart at all times, never touching, always looking with this dour expression on their faces like two angry bald eagles. Never touching! I have no idea what they knew about procreation that we don't, but they never got any closer than this. Yet they managed to have my grandmother. Now, to say that my grandmother was a cold woman when it came to relationships is an understatement. She was the type of person who could drop the temperature in the room just by walking into it and looking at you. I remember one conversation when I was a little boy that my grandmother and my grandfather had with me. They sat me down and they got ready to speak. And I knew they were serious because they both had their teeth in. My grandfather looked at me and he said, "Gregory, we have to have a conversation with you." He looked over at my grandmother. He was my grandmother's henchman. And she gave him the look. "Gregory, you're a good Jewish boy, but we want you to know something. If you marry a non-Jewish girl, if you so much as date a non-Jewish girl, we won't love you anymore. We will treat you as if you were dead." And I thought to myself, wow, okay, can I have some milk and cookies? My grandparents, these lovebirds, begat my father. My father, too, was just a rare gem in terms of relationships. When my father started dating my mother, their first date was him taking her to his college so that he could register for classes. That's not a first date. That's a boring experience. But that was his idea of romance. So with that in mind, they ended up continuing to date, which in retrospect is more of a reflection on my mom than my dad. They continued to date. They got married. For their first anniversary present, he got my mom his and hers snow shovels. These snow shovels were labeled hers and hers, as if you'd expect anything more from a man who, when they actually got engaged years before, instead of buying my mom a ring, he bought himself a convertible. That's true. And my mom's mom was so entertained by this concept that she didn't talk to my father for 25 years. I decided, having grown up hearing these stories, that I would make a different choice. I thought, you know what? I can be a yes man. I can be giving constantly to my partner. I can engage my partner, satisfy her every need in every possible way. Now, that too has a downfall attached to it. And I remember about 6 years ago, my ex and I standing around talking, and in the midst of this conversation, we were having an argument. And it was one of these classic arguments where you're arguing about nothing. You're arguing about something that somebody said and then how you responded to it, and the argument compounds and twists in and on itself, and finally you just want to scream. I think it started with something like me saying, "Hey, thanks for picking me up at the airport. I really appreciate it." "What do you mean?" What do you mean, what do you mean? I'm happy that you picked me up at the airport. I really appreciate it. Why do you mean like that? Why am I being like what? Defensive. I'm not being defensive. I'm not good. In that moment, my ex walked across the street. And she was so frustrated, and I was so determined to catch up with her as she was walking away from me. I thought, I make my living as a speaker and a facilitator of communication, and I can't communicate with the woman I love. I started sprinting after her. And as I did, I looked to my left, and a car screeched to a halt. I kept running, looked to my right, a car screeched to a halt, but a second too late, and BAM! I rolled up onto the hood and fell onto the ground. So there I was, lying on my back in the Southern California sun, thinking about my relationship and the path that had led me there. And in my mind, the only voice I could hear was my grandfather saying, "Gregory, you see what happens when you date a non-Jewish girl?" My friends, it's possible to not be the yes man. It's possible to give to your partner and at the same time reflect on what your own needs are. You don't have to be dour. You don't have to be detached. You don't have to be self-centered. You can have a combination of all the elements you need to protect yourself while still be giving to your partner. I realize there's a middle path. Because while the road to hell might be paved with good intentions, the road to love certainly doesn't have to be. There you go. So to see the word perfect version of that, meaning, this was a slightly more casual version, but to see the word perfect, like wordsmith down to the syllable version, Vimeo, Greg Bennick, Toastmasters, check it out. So my question to you is, because we're not here today to say, "Oh wow, Greg did a funny speech, Greg's so cool, Greg's so cool." We're here to learn something. Where did you see scene? Where did scene happen in that? Anybody? Yes, Kyle.
Well, the first scene is, of course, you lying in the California sun, and with those words, we develop a whole set of assumptions about what's going on.
Absolutely. Because, and I'm going to jump to something with that perfect comment. I'm going to jump to something I was going to cover in a few minutes. And be thinking about this as we explore scene a little more. Ways to create scene. Because if I just show you scene, you go, cool, Greg shows scene, check. But rather, let's learn how to create scene. And the way I did that constantly in that speech was through words and movement. So be thinking about words and movement, because words most definitely came into play there. We'll talk about that more in a minute. The specificity of the words. Other scenes.
Well, when you were talking about your grandparents and the distance between them, and then walking into the room and instantly being, you just set the whole image.
Good. Yes, great-grandparents, dour, and that's very true. If I brought pictures to show you, you'd be like, wow, he was telling the truth. And it's funny, when I was going to do this, when I was going to do the speech, I called my parents on the East Coast, and I said, "Mom, Dad, I've got good news and I've got great news. The good news is that I'm going to be entering this speaking contest. The great news," I was trying to get them hyped up, "is that I'm going to be speaking about our family." And my mom was like, "And what's the hook?" I'm like, "Well, I'm going to be telling the truth." And I expected to be just kind of excommunicated from the Bennick family. Instead, my parents thought the speech was a riot. My dad was like, "Yeah, we did get her a hedge trimmer and a shovel." Loved it. And my mom was like, "It's true, my mom didn't talk to you for 25 years." So they loved it, right? And the characterization of the grandmother is spot on. Anyhow, so that said, yes, that was specifically designed to bring us into a moment where historically we've seen tin-type images or photos from 100 years ago, and they look exactly like that always. Now, there's a couple ways to do that, right? You could represent, here's my grandparents just standing here. But as I'll talk about in a few minutes about movement, it's always important to be specific with our movements. And that doesn't mean theatrical. That doesn't mean you have to go in and say to your boss, "Good day, and today I will give the presentation." It doesn't have to be theatrical. But the concept of being specific with our movements, or at least thinking about our movements, can be very valuable in terms of creating scene. If I say that I'm angry, that's one thing. If I just so much as do this with my hand and say that I'm angry, I haven't changed much, but this signifies something, And if I've got my hand above my head and I say I'm angry, you're like, okay, where's the hand going, right? It's all about creating that world beyond the words. So, in terms of establishing here that my great-grandparents were dour people, and allowing us collectively to recollect on something we've all seen, which is this standing far apart with a dour look on our face, that brings us all into a scene. And then to add that movement to it, of course, it's just like characterizing them as eagles or as like that. It just kind of adds to it. The movement and the word choice adds to it specifically. Okay, another scene. Anybody else see it? Yes.
The talk with your grandparents, especially your grandfather, and you sitting down innocently and his body movement first.
Great, I'm glad, because, and this is something we can all take from, right? We can take something from this, meaning that when presenting, we don't have to be presenting oblivious to the natural world around us, okay? And that was the point I wanted to make with the speech, in the speech, was I wanted to use physical props that are in this world. Because I see so many speeches, so many presentations, where people are so lost in their thoughts that they're staring over the audience, they're giving facts and figures, and they're talking about the thing, and they're not rooted in the world that I am in. And I thought, you know what? I've seen 101 Toastmasters speeches. I said, I want to do one where I'm rooted physically to the earth in the context that we were all in. The chair, this floor, the lights, this table. So, to start the speech like that, it's a great theatrical convention. But what it also says is, Greg is on the table in the room that I'm in, which creates context, which brings us all into a scene that is right here, right now. Same thing with the grandfather speech, right? I could have just said, my grandfather's here, Gregory, and then I could have, characterized myself here. But a little boy would stand there, a little boy would sit down on the ground cross-legged, or, given that there's a table here, we all know there's a table here, it's not like we, imagined it 5 minutes ago. A little boy would just kind of sit. He'd just sit and wait for his grandparents to tell him that he was dead for dating a non-Jewish girl. Whatever. So I wanted to root myself in that reality. That brings us also into seeing. Any other moments of seeing? Yes?
Yeah, you went chasing after your lady and
Yeah.
there were cars coming off the way.
True story. Laguna Beach, California. Emergency room. Good times. Yep. So anyway, but yes, absolutely. And then you kind of get into this thing like how much theatrics to bring into a presentation, because it can be distracting too. If I was and I was running after her, you'd be like, no, not really. It's like that works very rarely when you're miming and overdoing it a bit. So just a little suggestion of it. You're with me, and because of how I'm using my voice too, that creates the scene. You know that things are ramping up because I've just done this moment about whatever, that kind of whole, that attitude in her. And then, you know that I'm using my voice in a way that, I'm running across the street, which is a different way of saying I'm running across the street. So our inflection can also help create a scene. But that most definitely was a moment where I wanted to transport the audience somewhere. A key thing about that, and I know I'm breezing through 100 million things at once, so if I say something you want to reflect back on and say, was the fact that in the midst of creating that scene, what's important is to draw you in a way that is realistic and honest and believe in it myself while I'm doing it, right? So that's a lesson for each of us, that as we're speaking or communicating, trying to create a scene, that we do so in a way that we believe. And I mean that. If you're giving a presentation for your boss, if you're in an argument, if you're in a discussion, if you're in a debate, if you're asking a question, believe in what you're saying. Believe it. In the same way that I'm telling you, when I'm doing the grandmother characterization, I'm doing this whole thing. It's not just oh, cool, I'm a mime, look at me, or something. I'm believing it. I'm remembering back to what it was like, and I'm embodying that kind of the feeling that I got looking at those pictures, believing it so much. That helps communicate it too, so that I don't have to be I was running across the street, just overboard, it's, acting circa 1950. Any other scene moments? Yes.
With regards to the timeline, do you position yourself across the stage in certain periods of time, like in the past, and then move
Yes.
forward into the timeline? So the scene was moving along through your life as the generations went forward. It was visual, and you could see the scene in your spot.
Good. And another specific choice, that's another specific choice too. And I'll speak in terms of how we can use that, okay? So people talk about anchoring in terms of speaking. If I said right now to anybody in the room, where do my great-grandparents live? You'd all say they live over there, right? And my grandmother lives here, my parents live over here, and Greg is lost somewhere in this kind of zone, right? But that's important because, it didn't even have to be that dramatic. If I cut out all the physicality and I said, you know what, everybody, my great-grandparents, they took pictures together. My grandmother, she was kind of mean, and my parents dated in the late 1950s, got married, and they're still together, I can't believe it. And then here I am. Same thing. I'd say, where do my great-grandparents live? Say over there, grandmother here, parents there. So anchoring different parts of the stage. Yes?
Just to add to that, you actually created different characters that almost seemed to stay up there. It almost seemed like you weren't alone in the front of the room.
Maybe the best compliment on that speech.
It was awesome.
Awesome.
Because I
Thank
could
you.
keep seeing them there.
That is so cool. Thank you. That's so cool. I appreciate that very much. And that's exactly the point, right? Is to create this space where we've created scene. And for us here, not that you're going to do this speech, but if you're giving a presentation, let's say, and your presentation needs to be about economic forecasting in the year 2017. And you're like, I want to let you know about economic forecasting in the year 2017. Now, things are looking pretty good, but I'll tell you some great news. That's the great news spot. The audience will connect that with great news, that with economic forecasting. That's something that we can use. We can use that idea, or rather, you can use that idea however you like. But when you're speaking and you establish a space, a scene, people will relate to that scene later on. So that's a great point about the timeline. And my gestures also speak to that timeline too. The road to love might be paved with good intentions, or rather, the road to hell might be paved with good intentions. The road to love certainly doesn't have to be. And I've established this road. When you watch the Toastmasters video version, you're going to get more subtleties about that, like references to roads and paths and journeys and things like that to reinforce the idea. Yes?
Not regarding the scene specifically, but this seems more relevant to preparation, your preparation, and an actual presentation where we would think these things through ahead of time, develop those scenes in more of a formal way. But as in going into your boss's office, how do you make that transition into that spontaneity?
Totally. I would say just pick one thing. Okay, so let's go into when Kyle made his reference before, his point about words and word choice. I think about scene in terms of words and movement. Okay, so word choice could be the one thing you think, I'm going to be specific about my words and my intention going into my boss's office today. Instead of being like, hi boss, I'm not sure about that. I'm going to be confident about not knowing what I'm presenting. Hi, I'm here today. I'm totally unprepared. Fire me. Whatever it might be. Just be confident and straightforward. Confident and straightforward even. That choice of words establishes the scene that you are a confident person in this office, right? And let's say you were making a joke or being funny, maybe being specific about word choice. I worked on, and again, the video version is more specific. I worked on the opening line of that speech again and 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 again. Refining it 20 times over. Why? It establishes the entire scene. What if I had come out and said, it was sunny out? Okay. I was in the sun. I was in the Southern California sun. I was lying in the Southern California sun. I was lying on my back in the Southern California. Now we're getting somewhere, right? If I'm lying on my back in the Southern California sun, giving a speech in the Pacific Northwest, people know that I was on vacation. They know I live here. Cool, we're getting there. I was lying on my back in the Southern California sun thinking about my relationship. Okay, now I've got enough time, and the path that had led me there. That implies, in the world beyond the words, that I had time to be on vacation, and on that vacation, time to reflect. Okay, so already you're like, he's relaxing in the sun. That's a trick, right? It's a setup. It's a setup for the end of the speech, but the word choice is my point. And there's a historical record of this happening going back, for all dawnting language, but in the 1590s, Shakespeare writes, plagiarizes, what have you, Romeo and Juliet, okay? So this record, Romeo and Juliet, it existed before he wrote it, but let's give him credit. Okay, so anyway, Romeo and Juliet is written in 1590s. So at the very beginning of the play, there's a fight, and Lady Montague comes out, she's looking for Romeo. Okay, so what does she say? She says, oh, where is Romeo? Saw you him today? Right glad I am he was not at his fray. That's very specific. You know a lot about the character just from that. Oh, where is Romeo? Saw you him today? Right glad I am he was not at his fray. She doesn't come out and say, hey everybody, where's Romeo? You seen him? Dude, have you seen him? I'm glad he wasn't at this fight. Fight has the same number of syllables as fray. He could have played around with the word fight and made a rhyme, but instead he said, right glad I am. I'm just so glad he was not at this fray. Fray is a word that just implies loftiness. So we know that Lady Montague is so far above this street fight. Oh, right glad I am he was not at this fray. Through that word choice, establishing scene, beyond even seeing people fighting on stage. So there's a historical precedence for this. So, thinking about are your words. Movement was the other one that I wanted to talk about. So, movement gets really specific in this piece. And we can be thinking about our movement. For example, the fist raised in the air example I gave before. what is our words, what are our words communicating? Okay, so our words are communicating. Our words are communicating one part of our communication. Our movement is communicating another part of our communication. So, you saw it over here with the grandfather. You saw it with the transformation to the grandmother, and lying down and all these sorts of things. So I was trained many years ago when I was studying theater in specific techniques where you learn to physically represent objects through your physicality. So, for example, and actually, Karen, can I tell everybody about the conversation we had the other night about the peanut butter jar? Karen the other night was talking about a speech that she was giving, and she said in the speech, so in the speech I'm reaching for a peanut butter jar. And I stopped, and we were talking about it. We had this long, totally geeky, amazing conversation about reaching for the peanut butter jar. Because in her speech, she was going to reach for a peanut butter jar. No one in the history of the world has reached for a peanut butter jar like that. That's quite, honestly, there's no peanut butter jar shaped like that. I don't know how you hold it. I don't know how you get your hand around a peanut butter jar that was shaped like that. And I said, no, that's absolutely not how you reach for a peanut butter jar. What you do if you're reaching for a peanut butter jar, and you're telling an audience in a speech that you're reaching for a peanut butter jar, is you reach for a peanut butter jar. That communicates the shape of the peanut butter jar beyond the words. That is like, this, peanut butter in my hand or something. So this is a technique, and you can look it up online. This is a technique that was championed by a man named French guy named Jacques Lecoq, the most unfortunately named man. I mean, it's like, you gotta wonder, right? It's just like you grow up to become this brilliant thinker, and your name essentially translates to Jack the Dick. It's just like, it's unfortunate, So the point being, Jacques Lecoq, it's fun, it's insane. Like, why wouldn't he consider changing his name? I said, I don't know. I actually went to high school. This is just so crazy. I went to high school with, I shouldn't even say their first names. I can say their last names because it's true. But these two brothers, I'm going to change their first names to Susan and Michael. Susan and Michael Shapinas. That was literally their last name. Shapinas, and it's spelled S-H-U, but pronounced S-H, like Shapinas. Like, it's just so weird. Like me introducing myself to somebody saying, "Hi, my name is Greg. It's Lewis." Which I'm glad isn't my name. I'm glad it's not. If I was ever lost in the forest, no man would be able to find me. So anyway, back to what we're talking about. Where did we just go? The Lecoq technique specifies or suggests that we can be specific in our physical movements to represent something beyond our words. Okay, it's very important. And it's important for us as we're creating scene to think about how does our physicality represent what we're saying? How can we use our physicality beyond our words? So, and this goes back to your question too, just be thinking about taking one part of it, like I'm going to carry myself differently. I'm going to gesture specifically. And it doesn't have to be like so specific that it's stiff, but rather you can just, you can gesture in a way which is natural, but communicate something beyond your life. So, do you have any?
Awesome. Thank you so much. Round of applause. I know I have a question. Like, how did you, was it grandma, great-grandma?
Great-grandma.
Coach me through this. Like,
Okay. This is great. Okay. So, think about, let me borrow this, because and that's specific too, right? Because the picture taken in the 1890s, grandma isn't like, I'm going to hold my Shure microphone like this. Go ahead, take the picture. Like there was no microphone, right? So, however, imagine the picture. Okay, so imagine the picture that you've seen, the tin type of two people standing together. It's it's a tin picture. Okay, got it. So, yeah, there you go. I mean, they're probably smiling less. There you go. Big difference. Okay. Now, the reason that I chose, if we did a coach you in terms of what I did, I made the choice to make the reference to them being like eagles or owls or whatever I said, right? So I hunched up my shoulders and I kind of like hunched my back over and I put my hands behind my back. Okay, so hands behind my back. And then I leaned forward a little bit, and I looked at the audience like, what was the Muppet that they back in the day with the eyebrows, Exactly, eagle, So I just kind of looked at the audience that way. Yeah, you look like my ancestors.
Okay, thank you so much, Greg. This is wonderful. Any quick questions?
I just wondering, if you have a speak in, what would be your recommendations for movement and place, you know, getting people to anchor where you can't move back and forth?
Well, it's always important to figure out where you're going to speak before you speak, if you can do that, right? So, you know, what would have happened today, for example, if we had just been in this space? I could have done that, or even let's just use right here. Let's say we only had this much space. I could have done that speech, maybe without lying down. You know, I could have started out like this, lying on my back. That would have maybe established it. I could have done great-grandparents by simply looking this way and having the characterization go off this way, grandmother being here, and then my parents being over here. You would have gotten this.
Still segment to spots.
Yeah, I would have
But
preferred.
you're just not physically,
Exactly.
okay.
So I mean, I think that if you're limited by space, for example, you can make choices given the world of the speech, the actual, like I said before, the physical world of the speech. Because if you start like climbing the walls, trying to get out of the room, it's like, no, everybody, bear with me. I have to represent this thing that happens 10 feet away. People will be like, crazy person, right? So you have to, you know, be in the world of the speech as you, in the like literal physical world, as you give the virtual world, you know, the world beyond the actual presence.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, I really enjoyed your Jewish accent of your grandfather. So I feel it really added to your scene. And if you're doing a speech, and if you're a female and trying to be your father, how can you? It's not so easy to come off and do a hoarse voice. How do you get to?
Got it. So and you'll see this when you look at the Vimeo.com version of the speech, because when I do my X, and I'm like, whatever, right?
Yeah.
I had to make a very specific choice, because if I'm on the stage going, whatever, and like overdoing it, people are gonna be like, weird, what's happening? Why are you using this high pitch? Like they're gonna get knocked out of the world of the speech. So if I just added, you know, from this to whatever, it gives the impression it's enough. So if you dropped your voice down slightly, you don't have to, if you're representing a man's voice, you don't have to go way caricature, like, hey, sway, Johnny. You know, it doesn't have to be that. You know, if your vocal register is here, if that's your normal vocal register, and you drop it down to this, we're gonna get it. If you we're gonna get it. We're not gonna sit there and go like, well, what's with the octave lower? We're not gonna, not understand it. It's like, it's strange. A sharp to B flat. I don't get the speech anymore. We're gonna get it.